In an ideal project, after approval of the project management plan, there would be no changes to specifications, there would be no changes to scope, there would be no changes to cost, there would be no changes to resources throughout the project lifecycle. Therefore, if you have a project where the specifications do not change, and the same happens with scope, cost and resources, it would be a project without failures, and it would be a project without rework. Therefore, it would be a project that should be easily approved by customers. Unfortunately, this is not what happens in the real world. In the real world, there are changes in the project specification during project execution, changes in the project scope during project execution, changes in the project cost during project execution, changes in project resources during project execution, and project managers need to be vigilant when dealing with changing scenarios. The project lifecycle is the division of a project into phases that it must go through from start to finish. Projects can be divided into phases, also called stages or steps by some authors. A phase is a set of logically related project activities that generally ends with the delivery of a partial or complete product. These phases can be divided into subphases, then sub-subphases, and so on. The number and labels of these phases depend profoundly on the area for which the model was made. These phases or subphases are usually given names that indicate the type of activity carried out in that phase. Here are some examples of phase names. Here we have the concept development phase. If we want to divide this phase into two subphases, we must choose phase names that present the same activity. For example, concept development can be divided into customer requirements and feasibility study. Next we have a phase called preliminary design, and this phase does not have any subphase. Next we have a phase called design, and this phase is divided into two subphases: architectural design and detailed design. It is important to choose names that demonstrate that these phases have the same type of activity. And finally we have a phase called test. Therefore, it is important to emphasize that the names of the phases are chosen according to the activity carried out in that phase. Obviously, the division into phases of a small project is different from that used for large-scale projects. Regardless of the number of phases that make up the project, they all have similar characteristics. Each phase focuses on specific work and generally produces a deliverable that should be available at the end of the phase. Each deliverable must be submitted to the review team to be formally reviewed. Once the review is complete, it will be available for customer approval. A project is made up of several phases and subphases that produce deliverables at the end of its execution. A project will have more phases and subphases the more complex it is. It is important to highlight that a project needs to have these phases structured sequentially. This will allow adequate control to enable the creation of the expected product, or the expected result, or the expected service. Imagine this type of project: civil construction projects, electronic development projects, event organization projects, software development projects. Can you imagine that there is a single project lifecycle that encompasses all these projects? In practice, there is no ideal organization of phases that can be applied to all types of projects. The life cycle of each project is defined by the phase model used and is determined by the organization or even by the technology used in the project. It is important to highlight that some choose to divide the project lifecycle into 4 phases. Others choose to divide the project life cycles into 5 phases, while others may opt for something for a project life cycle much more detailed. Embarking on a project journey involves navigating through a series of stages known as the project life cycle. As seen previously, the project life cycle describes the different stages a project goes through from start to finish. It covers several main phases, each addressing different needs as the project progresses. In the PMBOK guide presents a 4-phase project life cycle as shown in the figure. Starting the project phase is the phase to understand the goals, priorities, deadlines, and risks of the project. Organizing and preparing phase is the phase of defining the tasks and schedule necessary to execute the project. Carrying out the work phase is the phase to turn your plan into action and monitor project performance. Ending the project phase is the phase to analyze results, summarize key learnings, and plan next steps. Establishing an appropriate phase sequence allows you to gain a high-level view of your project's evolution, ensuring you reach important milestones along the way. If a poorly designed sequence of phases is established, that is, without a realistic objective, with an unprepared plan and an unspecified direction, the result may be an unsuccessful project and with high expenses incurred. Let's assume that you start a project and go directly to the work execution phase before the planning phase. In other words, suppose you start executing some task without having done any planning for that task first. Can you imagine the size of the problem this would generate? In the pre-project phase, before defining the sequence of phases of your project, it is important to analyze 2 documents, as shown in the figure. Business case. The project business case will help the sponsor decide whether or not to fund a project by providing an analysis of the benefits and costs of the project. A project business case defines the purpose and justification of the project and serves as the basis for the sponsor's decision to move forward or not to invest in your project. And benefits management plan defines the processes to create, maximize and sustain the project benefits expected by the business. The benefits management plan must establish baselines and goals to measure the achievement of each identified benefit. Reviewing these documents will help the program manager establish the appropriate sequence of project phases. During the pre-project phase, you verify that the business case estimates the benefits of completing the project and proves whether it is worth pursuing. In the case of 4 phases shown in the figure, a generic project life cycle has the following phases. Start the project is the first step in starting a new project. During this phase, you define your project at a high level to demonstrate its business value while also evaluating how practical it is to complete it with the resources provided. Here you continue with the business case and benefits management plan analysis, and begin the feasibility study. A feasibility study examines all aspects of a proposed project, including technical, economic, financial, legal and environmental considerations, with the goal of determining whether or not the project should be initiated. It also initiates cost-benefit analysis and other actions to establish why the project should be undertaken and what business benefits it will bring. In general terms, a cost-benefit analysis involves adding up all the costs of a project and subtracting that amount from the total projected benefits of the project. If the projected benefits outweigh the costs, then the project can be carried out. If, on the other hand, the costs outweigh the benefits, then the project can be reconsidered. Here a question arises. After these initial analyses, is the project viable? If the answer is yes, it is necessary to define some important topics that need to be considered in the project. Then you define your specific objectives. Define the project deliverables, and define the project roadmap in more detail. Then, you can use all this information to bring key stakeholders into the project. Stakeholder involvement from the beginning is important because the project will reflect their needs and priorities, also brings their support and commitment to the project, and also brings visibility to the project. This will also increase the chances of getting project approval at an early stage. This phase will end with the issuance of the project charter. The project charter, it is a formal document that describes the purpose, describes the scope, describes the key stakeholders, describes the project objectives, describes who is involved, and describes how it will be achieved. The project charter serves as the basis for a project. Everything stakeholders need to know about why a project needs to happen should be contained in the project charter. And this document will guide all subsequent decisions and actions. This is the document that sells the project to its stakeholders and broadly defines what the return on investment will be. Because the project charter is the document that sells the project to stakeholders and broadly defines what the return on investment will be, it is important that the project is aligned with stakeholder expectations and standards.